when I was working on my first book, you know what, I'm going to walk around with this thing. When I was working on my first book, I would meet people, go to my niece's wedding, and people who knew me all my life would say, Mike, what have you been up to these days? I say, oh, I'm working on a book. And then they'd say, oh, a book, listen, what's your book about? I said, it's about owls. And they would say, owls? They'd be like, what do you mean, what about owls? And I would have to size them up in that moment. And I would have to do I drop the UFO bomb? And that can go really bad. So what I would do is I would say, I'm working on a book on owls mythology. And they go, owl mythology, oh, that's interesting. And that's true. I think that my work is about owl mythology. And in my research, I'm saying that the modern UFO contact experience is a mythological event, and the owl is the symbol for that event. And I feel like I can make a good case for that argument, that the modern UFO stories are mirroring the ancient folklore of the owl. Now, mythology has two definitions. One, that it is false, like a fairy tale. You look up in the dictionary, it says false, fairy tale. And the other definition says that myth is something vital, something alive, something a reflection of deeper truths. And it's this vital way of looking at myth that seems to be playing out within my research and within my own experiences. And I am seeing these ancient themes and these ancient ideas making themselves known right now within a newer framework. Joseph Campbell, he was my North Star as I was working on these books. And he said, myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human manifestation. He said that in 1949. And it's not just UFOs. So anyway, I'm going to make my case that owls and UFOs are somehow connected, and it's not just UFOs. It's more. I am seeing owls as synonymous with the mystical, and both owls and UFOs are part of our human experience, part of our mythic experience, and for me, they are playing the same mythic role. I will offer stories and impressions and speculations, but I will offer no conclusions. What I am finding is simply too elusive. A lot of people reach out to me with stories, and who's here has seen my talk before? Okay. So you've seen 20 minutes of it. You haven't seen the whole thing. So a guy reaches out to me with a story. I get a lot of stories, and he lives near an apple orchard. He's got an apple orchard on the property, and he meditates in the back of the apple orchard. And he's meditating, and he's calm, and there's a forest right in front of him, and the orchard is behind him. And coming from the forest is this horrible screeching, this terrifying screech. And he says that everything about it scared him. And the hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he said, I got to get out of here. But he said, no, I have to face this. So he walked into the forest, and there was an owl on a branch at eye level. And he walked, and this owl was looking right at him, and it was screeching, and it was loud. And he said, you know what? It felt like it was angry at me. It felt like it was chewing me out. It felt like it was anger that was like projecting anger at me. And then it flew off. He went back to his house, and the wife and kids were there. And he said, like, oh my God, I saw this owl, and it was on the branch, and it was looking right at me. It was screeching at me, and they're kind of like, kind of glazed over. The kids were like, Dad, and they didn't get it. So he gets his camera, and he walks back through the orchard into the forest, and he stands in the same spot, and he says, my family doesn't believe me. I need a picture. And then this happens. And the owl is there for a little bit, and it flies off. He gets his picture. And then I asked, what were you meditating about? What was your intention? And he said, I was at a point in my life where I felt everything I had been taught was a lie. I was meditating to the source of creation. I was praying to see through the veil. I was praying for answers. I was struggling with what God is. Now, there are no UFOs in this story, but it is everything about the role of the owl. This guy was struggling with what God is. Now, like, I'm not at all churchy in that respect, but I recognize the mythic power of his intention, and it's this mythic power that has been the binding thread within my research. Before I get too deep into this, I should share a little bit about myself. I spent 25 years as an instructor and guide in remote wilderness places all throughout North America, throughout the Rockies and the Cascades and the Sierras and this terrain around here in the Rockies and in the desert Southwest and in Alaska. And for 25 years, this was my classroom. And I feel comfortable sleeping outside under the stars. I feel comfortable using a map. And all of these things will play a part in the story I'm about to tell. I also worked as an illustrator, and that'll be part of it too. In October of 2006, 19 years ago, is when all this stuff started with me. I had been living in the Tetons. Let me just do this here. I'm living right near Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. I was actually living on the Idaho side of the Tetons, and it's a beautiful place. And I spent a lot of time in the mountains, a lot. And I would go out all the time for one night, and I would sleep under the stars, and it was so powerful, and it was so rewarding. And I met a woman in this town. She was working at the same school I was, and I had been up in Alaska all summer, and I came down to the lower 48, and I got into conversation with her, and I said, "Oh, you've been here all summer. You must have camped a lot." She said, "No, I haven't camped once." I said, "That's terrible. I'll take you camping for one night." So we went out, complete stranger, went out for one night, and her name is Kristen, and she was a complete stranger. So we went out for one night, and we hiked into the backcountry. We left the house in the afternoon, light packs. We didn't take a tent. The weather was going to be beautiful, so we knew not to take a tent, and it was wonderful. So as the sun was setting, we're sitting on a big flat rock. I'm going to be filled down here for a second. I'm sitting on a big flat rock, and I'm making dinner on a little camp stove, and we're having this conversation. And all of a sudden, the conversation gets really deep, like powerful. And I was like, "Oh wow, I did not expect this. This woman is smarter and more insightful and more mystical than I would have suspected." And at that point, an owl flew right above us. And then a second owl. And then a third owl. And for the next hour or so, these owls continued to fly by us. We actually finished our dinner. It was in bear country. So we packed up everything, walked another mile up the trail, and found a spot to camp. So we didn't camp where our food odors were. And these owls followed us. And we laid down under the stars, the Rocky Mountain, high elevation, spectacular. And on our backs, the owls would fly right over our faces. And they're totally silent in flight. So we would be lying there in absolute silence, and the stars would be blotted out for just a half a second. It was spectacular. And then we got up the next morning. We're like, wow, that was pretty. Wow, the owls. And then I said, let's go camping again. And so 4 days later, we went camping to a completely different spot in the mountains. But this time it was a little colder. We had a tent set up, and it was a little just chilly enough that it was like, and I did a lot of outdoor work, and I was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to see that hilltop there. We're going to walk up to the top of that hill. And this is the terrain. This was taken on that trip. So this is the kind of terrain we were in on the trip. So this was the next morning this was taken. So we walked up to the top of the hill. And as we got to the top of the hill, the sun was setting, and 3 owls started flying around us. And I was, to have it happen once was pretty cool. To have it happen twice was positively mystical. And we both know it. And so before the owls would they'd land in a tree over there, and they'd kind of fly past us. Not this time. They would land on a branch right next to us, and one landed at our feet. I can so clearly see Kristen's face in this moment. And she just had this look of astonishment. And both of us sort of freaked out after this. Here's one thing. Now, Now, there's a lot of talk about screen memories and stuff like that, and I was actually reading UFO literature at the time. I knew all about screen memory. So these were real owls. I have no doubt. They were tiny, short-eared owls, very common owl. They're about 10, 11 inches high, super cute. What I heard of, I'm going to tell you something that I did not tell then, and now I'm happy to talk about it. It's hard to shut me up about it, actually. But I heard a voice in my head both nights when we saw those 3 owls. And the voice said, this has something to do with the UFOs. And it could have been my voice. It could have been like an exterior voice. But we were looking at real owls, and a voice said this had something to do with the UFOs. Now, years went by, and I eventually started a blog, and I wrote a little blog post about this very event. And there was one point, and I was like Kristen her name is Kristen, so she moved out of the valley, and I was like, what were we talking about the very first night when we saw the very first owl? So I called her up. She was living back in Michigan, and I was living in the town in Idaho, and I said, Kristen, what were we talking about the night I saw the very first, right when we saw the first owl? And she said, oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. I was trying to articulate my deepest beliefs about God. And this took like a normal, sort of seemingly normal set of events, and just, it like set me off. Like I knew, like I was, all of a sudden, I felt like I was losing my mind. And Kristen knew me in this time. And I did a talk a couple years ago, and she was in the audience. She came to one of my talks, and I sort of like, I'm going to be near you. You're going to make the drive. You are coming to my talk. And so she came to the talk, and she was in the audience. It's actually a big crowd. And so periodically I'd go, Kristen, how am I doing? Like when I said, like, I went insane, and like, Kristen, is that accurate? And she's like, oh yeah, you were. So I got completely obsessed, not only with owls, right? So there's totem animals and totem meanings for owls and symbolic meanings for owls and historical meanings for owls. But I also started looking into my own UFO experiences. So those happened simultaneously. And there were 3 events in my youth. So at the time I would have been 46. And there were 3 events in my youth that I had never explored. And this happened in 1974 in Northville, Michigan. I was with my friend Kenny. We were both about 12 years old, and it was a sleepover, and Kenny, it was either me or Kenny, I can't answer that one, but one of us went, look, and pointed to his bedroom window at night, and we ran up to the window. Our faces were pressed right up against the glass, and we watched this for about 30 seconds, I'm guessing. And it descended. It was this coffee can shaped thing. If I had to guess the size, I would say it was bigger than a van and smaller than a bus. And it was descending very clear in the night sky, and then it just blinked out. And I used to say the lights turned off, but I knew I was lying. It disappeared. It vanished instantly. And I drew this illustration that night. Kenny and I turned to Kenny. We had a friendship, and part of our friendship was we'd sit and draw. So I said, let's go down and draw this thing. So before talking about it, we both went down and drew it. And that's the drawing I did. There was actually a secondary associated lights, these little blinking lights. It's a little hard to see there, but there was a little blinking set of lights, and the lights seemed to blink in the night sky. They looked nothing more like airplane lights, but when they connected, that craft disappeared. I'm going to add one more detail. Kristen was born in Northville, Michigan. So also in the autumn of 1974, so also in 1974, I was walking home from a high school football game with my friend also named Mike, and we were walking through the neighborhood, and I wanted to be home in time to see a television show. There's 2 people in the back I wanted to be home in time to see Kolchak the Night Stalker. Friday night at 10 o'clock, I knew exactly what I was going to, so I was I'm going to leave at 9:30. Like you could stand in my driveway and hear the football game. Like we lived pretty close to the high school. So there's a point in the neighborhood right here, walking down, beautiful autumn night, suburbs, quiet, and the sky just click, turned orange, and then click, turned back to the normal night sky. The whole sky illuminated this rich, electric, highly illuminated orange. And both him and I were like, what just happened? And then we both did a little thing, like, oh, it could be like thunder, lightning. There was no sound at all. Could have been like an explosion. Nothing made sense. So I get to my house. He lived a little further into the neighborhood. And my parents were standing at the door. Why are you out so late? I said, I'm not out late. It's 9:30. It's 9:30. I'm not out late. And they pointed to the clock, and the 11 o'clock news was ending, and it was about 11:30. So it was roughly between an hour and a half and 2 hours of missing time. The next Monday at school, I'm with Mike. Can I swear? Okay, good answer. So I usually don't say this part. So the next Monday at school, I was with Mike and the other kids in the neighborhood. We're kind of sitting at my friends from junior high school, and I said, something weird happened on Friday night. And then Mike said, yeah, we saw a UFO with fucking lights and everything. And my first thought was like, I didn't see lights. I saw the sky turn orange. And I contacted him recently, and he said, I don't remember that night, but I do remember your parents were mad at you. You talked about that. This one's a little tougher to brush under the rug. This is 1993. I would have been 30 years old, and I was living in rural Maine, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I looked out my bedroom window, and I saw this. And I drew them standing still, but they were actually walking towards the house. And I was the only one home. And they were these 5 beings with the bald heads and the big black eyes, and they were backlit by this bright light. And I looked at this thing, and I felt absolute calm. This should have freaked me out, and I was absolutely calm. And I heard a voice in my head that said, oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down. And that's exactly what I did. And the next morning, I never bothered to go outside and look and see if there were footprints in the snow. I had this experience. This experience was very clear. And it took a lot of work to deny this one. And I denied it for decades. I don't deny it anymore. These and a few more stories like these were what I was trying to come to terms with when I went camping in the mountains with Kristen. I knew I had to look into these things, and it was like the simmering pot on the stove, and the water had reached a boil. And I started looking into my own experiences. And in the aftermath of that experience with Kristen, I was hit with so many synchronicities that either involved owls or UFOs. And this was not an easy time for me. This was a really shaky time for me. And in that time, I started a blog. So I started writing in real time. Initially, my blog was only going to be about synchronicities. I got a lot of synchronicity stories. And I started writing about the UFO contact experiences. And my life just came unfurled. Every thread in the sweater just unraveled. And so I was mostly talking in my blog, I was mostly talking about synchronicities, UFO abductions, and owls. And I started sharing my own owl stories, and then people started sending me my own owl stories. And so because of this, everyone I reach out to and talk with, and I've probably done it to people in the room here, I said, hey, have you ever had any odd experience with those owls? And when I started meeting people who had the UFO contact experience, and I would ask that question, so they would say, that's funny, you should ask that. I have the weirdest story involving an owl. Now, it's not 100% of the people, but it's enough that it's a very clear pattern, and I've been collecting, documenting, and archiving my stories, and consequently, I am known as the Owl Guy, and if you Google UFOs and owls, I'm the first thing that comes up, and I'm about the next 25 things underneath that. So, when I don't have to give out my email address. I can just say, just Google UFOs and owls. I'll come right up. You don't have to know how to spell my name. So if anyone anywhere in the world has an experience with a UFO and an owl, it's going to take them about 2 mouse clicks, and they're going to find me. And because of that, I've been receiving these stories. I'm asking to receive these stories. And I'm getting them. I'm getting about 1 or 2 a day, sometimes 6 a day. And that's not uncommon. And this has been going on for 16 years. So do the math. All this turned into a great big book in 2015. And this book has synchronicity right on the cover. And that's a very important part of this whole mystery to me. I can't untangle this. The synchronicity is part of all of this. And writing this book was my therapy. And I haven't shied away from saying that. And this led to a second book, which has longer accounts that didn't fit into the first book, And in each of these stories, it reads like a book of 19 short stories where I can tell these stories more completely, because these were stories that I could not fit in that first book. I had a third book, which was my some blog posts. This actually was, so I was doing my own self-reflection in real time, publicly on my blog. So instead of saying something like, "Oh, here's something that happened 10 years ago," I would say, "Here's something that happened last night," and I would put it in the blog. A couple years ago, I published a novel. This is a UFO story where I never use the word UFO in the book ever. So, okay, back to my research here. Any story I tell is not going to be a one-off. It'll be representational. It'll represent a pattern of stories that I've collected. And so there's no standalone stories here. So when this guy named Derek reaches out to me, and he was camping in the desert in 1995 in Arizona, and he's from the East. He'd never been out in the desert. It's his first night out. He's spectacular stars, and they're sleeping out under a cactus. And him and his buddy look up, and there's an owl looking down at him from the cactus. Neither of them saw it land. They're like, "Whoa, and they both like, this is ominous." The owl flies off, then a triangle-shaped craft flies right over their head and flies down the canyon. I sat with him at a bar, and he fought to explain how strange the motion was, how it hugged the landscape. He was like, "No way, this was not a helicopter, this was not a balloon, this was so strange." And so he talked to me. He said, "I had these other experiences. A couple days later, I saw flying like a UFO above my car when I was driving. And then I've had weird synchronicities, and I've had dreams of being floated through the walls." So he's saying a lot of this stuff that I've come to recognize. And he said something that I've heard a lot. He said, "I had a spiritual awakening in the aftermath of all this." Sev was up here. She spoke wonderfully to that. Now, this slide, spiritual awakening, that's bold, right? That's bold to say, UFOs, spiritual awakening. I'm not saying that it happens 100% of the time, but it is a recognizable pattern. And I was going to take this out. I was like, "Yeah, can I make that claim? That seems a little strong." So it's just in the slideshow. There's a little button I can push, and I can delete the slide. And so I was thinking, I should get rid of that slide. And it was a conference, and there were people around. And I had my laptop in my book bag, and I was thinking I should just delete it. And I was getting ready to do it. And this guy comes up to me and said, "Mike, I'm really interested in your owl stuff. I had this really powerful owl experience, and it happened alongside with the UFO experience. And you know what? Afterwards, I had a spiritual awakening." So that stayed in the slideshow and said, "We'll stay there forever." So the question is, why owls? And that's the core question of my books and this talk and of my own experiences. And the question is easy. The answer is not. I started this whole thing talking about owls and mythology. So the question is, what is the source of our mythology? On the surface level, I would argue that owls have a presence. Okay, this is from a cave in France, and this is estimated to be at over 30,000 years old. I will not attempt to pronounce that. There are two people from France in the room here. So owls have a presence. Owls can see into the darkness, and anyone will recognize that presence, whether it's an ancient man or seeing an owl tonight. Now, this ability for owls to see into the darkness seems to be at the core of the mythology. So seeing into the dark becomes a metaphor for seeing into other realms, seeing into the land of the dead, seeing into the land of our ancestors, seeing into that other realm, the land of the gods. And not only can they travel through the forest in complete darkness, they can travel to those other lands in a mythological landscape. And not only do they travel to those other lands, they return. They return with a message. This is universal. Owls are messengers. Shows up in cultures all over the world. And owls represent dream time. They represent the unconscious. They represent the shadow. This is a terracotta pot from ancient Greece. That is Athena. the goddess of wisdom. She has a companion, little owl. And this is a close-up, and that is a real owl. That's the genus and species it's called a little owl, and the name is Athene noctua, which, as far as I can tell, says the owl of the Athena at night. So let's fast forward 2,500 years, and we get the most popular books in the history of publication. Harry Potter has a pet owl. This is not ancient history. Harry Potter has a pet owl. It delivers the mail. It is a messenger. It is perfect. It is perfect. This is our present day mythology. It is still here right now. J.K. Rowling has owl right in her name. Do not start a new religion on this. This is more how my mind works. When Joseph Campbell was asked to give his simplest definition of myth, here's what he said. Myth is a story told almost exclusively in symbolic terms. Again, I'm treating both. So for me, I see this UFO as a symbolic, as a symbol, as a profound symbol, and I'm seeing owls as a profound symbol. And both of these are a living, vital myth. Sorry, the bugs are a little strong here. I'm trying to do the math here in my head. I can't do it. Okay, I got a countdown clock here. So a woman shared a story with me. She's a good friend of mine, and she worked with Bud Hopkins, and she's had a lot of contact experiences. If you need my volume up, I respond to like this kind of thing, or like this will work too. So she's had a lot. So she's had a lot of contact experiences, and she knew even as a young girl that she was having contact experiences. But as a 19-year-old, she was working at a summer camp. And it was in the North Cascades, and she was a girls' camp, and there was, because of the way the landscape were, they were deep in the backcountry, and there was just a spot where they could put some tents, and then you'd walk along the trail to the other spot where you could put some tents, and they would fit in. So she was with some girls in one part, and she was walking through the forest, and she got to a field, and she could hear the girls laughing and playing in the background. And she gets into this open meadow, and there's a gray alien standing on the side of the trail. And she looked at it, and it looked at her, and she said, this telepathic communication that takes place. And she said, it like looked right at her, and it was like, busted. And it went, owl, 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 owl. And she watched this thing morph into a gray alien right in front of her eyes. Did I say gray alien on the side of the trail initially? Okay, so I messed up. She watched this gray alien morph into a owl on the side of the trail, and then it turned around and walked into the forest. The screen memory part of this is something that everyone brings up, everyone knows about. It shows up in pop culture all the time. It shows up in movies and TV. And I did not invent this. This is something that the other researchers are well aware of. And the implication is that if the 4-foot tall owl is what people report. Someone driving down the road at night, they turn a corner, there's a 4-foot tall owl on the road. They're like, holy moly, what is that thing? And then the thing either flies away or suddenly they're home. And then they say, why is it, I was supposed to be home at midnight? It's 2 a.m. What happened? So I've talked to a lot of hypnotherapists who've done work in this, and they talk about they put the person under, describe the owl. They'll say, well, it's got a tight-fitting, shiny spacesuit on. It's really skinny, and it's got a bald head, and I don't think that's an owl. So this is, I would love to have brought the cardboard owls. They travel very poorly on an airplane, but this was my very first talk at a UFO conference in 2014, and I have these cardboard owls that sort of stand up, and the big one is 4 foot tall, and the little one is 27 inches tall. And that's 27 inches tall. That's like pushing the biggest owl in the world. So if someone said, I saw a 27-inch tall owl, I'd say, okay, I'm going to give you that one. But that's not what people are saying. They're saying, I saw a 4 foot tall owl. And there's no such thing as a 4 foot tall. What people describe is that the owl can look over the hood of their car. And you take the biggest owl in the smallest car in the world, and it's still not going to be able to look over the hood. So what I did is I took that cardboard owl and took it out in front of my house, and I lined it up in front of the car, and I drove back and forth with my old Subaru, and I was like, this is so creepy. This is like, to see a 4 foot tall owl is like, it was a piece of cardboard, and I was like, holy crap, this is scary. But people kind of just say, oh yeah, it's a 4-foot tall owl on the road. I showed this image at a talk, and there was someone in the audience that came up to me afterwards. Actually, it was a woman. A woman came up to me afterwards. She said, my husband told me he saw a 4-foot tall owl on the road, and I never believed him. When that slide came up of the owl in the car and the road, and he physically jumped in a way that I cannot like. So essentially, and then I talked with him too, but she never believed him until that night. And then he said, oh, I got a hold of him. He said, well, here's the picture I drew in 1987. And this is the picture he drew to represent the event. And that's a kind of weird looking owl. So there's not that many owls. I have some all the time. It's like, oh, well, just look at Google, like North American owls. There's only like 5 big ones. And like, just tell me what kind of owl it is. And I look and it's like, oh, no, none of these owls. Doesn't look like any of these owls. I'm like, mm-hmm. So, the couple, Rick and Maurizia, they, when they left the conference that night, there was an owl on the light post above their car in the parking lot. So owls and screen memories. Owl and deer are at the top of the list, kind of even Steven. If you talk to any UFO researcher who's doing this kind of work, they'll say, oh yeah, owls and deer, top of the list. Lots of stories of owls and deer. But you go down the list and there's more things: raccoons, clowns, dead relatives, Jesus, cats, firemen. Sev said a kangaroo, a talking kangaroo. I can't remember what she said. Yeah. So the implication is that these alien beings have a way to do a psychic projection into the mind of the observer, and that somehow they can mask themselves, right? So it freaks someone out if they saw a gray alien on the road, in the middle of the road while they're driving home at night, but not so much an owl. So you ask the researcher, like, hey, do you get any owl stories in do you have any owl accounts? And the researcher rolls her eyes. Like I talked about Hopkins about this, and other researchers. I've talked to Yvonne Smith and Mary Rodwell and Barbara Lamb and Bud. I've asked Bud, not Bud, Leo. I've asked Leo this, and they all say, oh yeah, owls show up all the time. Get owls all the time. It's all the time. And then they'll say, the reason is because the owl sort of looks like a gray alien, and that's why they're using the gray alien, or excuse the owl. Well, that doesn't work for a deer, really, when you think about it. And I'm just like, so, and then if you ask the experiencer, here are any odd owl experiences, or any experiences with owls, they'll say, wow, I got the weirdest story. So it's not 100%. I want to make this clear. It's not 100%. Seeing a UFO doesn't mean you're going to have an owl experience, or the other way around too. But it's a recognizable pattern. So my focus, like once you hear the screen memory story like 500 times, you don't need to hear it again. Just like, I'm going to do this. You don't need to hear it again. So what I'm actually more interested in is the seeing real owls. So the owls that night with Kristen, those were real owls. There was no UFO in that story except for the voice in my head. So that counts for me as an owl and UFO story. So owls showing up in the presence of a UFO or around the time of a contact experience. So a woman from Brazil contacted me. She's on her balcony. She's in a big high rise in a big urban center. And across from her apartment building is another building, and it's got a flat top, but it's got this big kind of pillar on the top of it. And this flying saucer comes floating along. And it's floating along. She sees this thing flying along. She sees this thing flying along, and it goes behind the pillar, and she's kind of waits for it to come out the other side, and nothing happens. And she says, come on, guys, where are you? And 2 owls landed on her porch and lived there for the next couple of months. These stories are common. The owl is a symbol. It is an archetype. This is something that's archetype is one of those words. It's like philosophy students stay up late at night arguing what an archetype means. My definition would be, it is something embedded into our subconscious or into our collective conscious that we all understand at an intuitive level and not at a logical level. The owl carries a deeper meaning. And what I'm finding, there's a lot of, if I talked with the rangers and asked them, I'd actually met them years ago and asked them the same question, and then they gave me the same answer yesterday. So the owls are very ominous, and they have a dark lore in the Southwest native culture. That's not so much what I'm finding collectively. What I can certainly say is the owl seems to be the totem of something difficult. A change, a challenge, often an inward challenge, but I'm finding something hopeful in these stories. These are my two friends, Suzanne and Jack. And okay, can someone do I got 48 minutes left. Does that work for you? Okay, okay, great. So I'm going to time out. Good, then I might ask that again here. So Suzanne and Jack, good friends of mine. Suzanne kept hearing a noise out her window at night, this strange noise. And her and Jack were like, what is that noise? What is that noise? And she eventually found a recording online, and she realized, oh, I know what that is. So the next time she heard it, she went outside. That is the sound of an eastern screech owl. It's a pretty common owl. It's got a loud, funny sound. It always reminds me of a Barbie horse, like that horse Barbie would ride, would sound like that, I think. So she's hearing this noise, and she gets her phone, and she says, I'm going to record this for Mike, for me. There's an owl in our yard. So she's in the apple tree, and she walks up to the apple tree with her phone, and as she approaches the phone, the screeching noise stops, and a bright orange orb illuminates in the tree, hovers there for a little bit, and then kind of flashes and goes out. And she never heard the owl in that tree again. How do you make sense of this? I can't even say if there was an owl in the tree. So that story, the story I just told, I wanted to include in a talk I gave some years ago. I was living in upstate New York, and I had my computer, and I've had the MP3 file of the owl call, and I wanted to add it to the PowerPoint thing. It was not working. There was nothing I could do. I was trying to drag it in. I was figuring out all these things. I was Googling things. I had the sound effect. I had the slide. I couldn't get the sound on the slide. So I was like, okay, I have to get up tomorrow morning. I'm doing a long drive to Portland, Maine, and I'm going to go to this conference, and I'm just going to do it without the sound effect. So I was super frustrated. I laid in bed, and I don't sleep very well night before travel and night before conference. So I'm laying in bed. I was living with my partner at the time, Andrea, and the sun is just coming up. And out my window is the sound of an eastern screech owl. I had never heard one in the wild before. And Andrea was like, is that an owl? And I was like, yeah, that's an owl. So I was like, oh, it told me in no uncertain terms, get out of bed, figure out a way to put that thing in the slideshow. So what I did is I had borrowed Andrea's laptop. I had one laptop against the other one, and actually recorded it right into the presentation in a really low-tech way. So I give this talk, very similar to the talk I'm giving here. I tell this story, and this guy comes up to me. His name is Mike C. also. And he comes up to me after the talk. He says, Mike, yeah, thanks. Just that when you played that sound effect of the owl, that owl, I just about fell out of my chair. He said, I've been hearing that sound in the baby monitor of my son's room. And this guy, Mike C., has had a lot of experiences. So Jack, remember the picture of Suzanne and Jack a little bit ago? Jack was reading my book, and he finished the book, got to the last page, closed the book. He said, I want to see an owl. I wish I could see an owl. So he walks outside, and he sees this little thing in the sky, he said it was like, there it was floating in the sky. And he said you know what it looked like? It looked like the fabric of the sky. And someone went up with a razor blade and put a little tiny slit in the fabric of the sky and shined a light through the sky. And I said, that's not a UFO, because it's not technically flying if it's a slit in the fabric of the sky. And he said, well, anyway, so he saw it for about 10 seconds, and then he looked away and looked back and was gone. So I just told 3 stories about people wanting to see an owl, or with that involved an owl and a UFO, either an orange orb, and they all involved me. So back to Mike C. Mike C. gets back to me a little while later and said, hey, I got this story I got to tell you. Now, Mike C is someone who's had a lot of stories. He's got a whole chapter in my second book, The Stories from the Messengers. He's got a lot of wild experience, a lot of owl experiences. And so he contacts me, Mike, I got this story I got to tell you. I was driving home from work, and I was coming home from work, full daylight. I was crossing the Memorial Bridge. I was living in Springfield, Massachusetts. I'm crossing the bridge, and I get across the bridge, and I get to the end of the bridge, and this owl, full daylight, making the left turn off the bridge, and this owl flies right up to the windshield and like scares the crap out of me. And then he said, I make the turn. I finish making the turn, and about a half mile later, I see this. And there's this copper-colored flying saucer hovering above the sewage treatment plant. Like, I don't know what symbology is embedded into that story, but it's hovering above the sewage treatment plant in this town, and it's kind of rising up. There's traffic. Nobody seems to notice it. He's caught in traffic. He can't do anything. He can't stop, so he just kind of drives along and loses sight of it. And he says, oh, Mike, by the way, when the owl and seeing the owl and the flying, as I saw all that, I was listening to an MP3. I had my MP3 player in the car, and I was listening to a talk you gave on owls and UFOs. And I was like, what? Like, what, you saw an owl and a UFO as you were listening to my voice talking about owls and UFOs? That one actually really threw me. I've had since very similar stories. This is a pattern. I don't know how to make sense of it. But what it tells me is that I am connected to something. Those three stories, Suzanne, Jack, Mike C, all these stories involve me. And it tells me I am connected to something, and I have a responsibility. This is Ann Strieber, and she has said something that I have come to trust. She says, I know if someone is telling the truth about their UFO experiences, and I know, she says, if it's not weird, I don't trust it. If someone tells me a story and it's not weird, I'm suspect. She calls this her bullshit detector, or she did. She's since passed. And I have taken that mantra to heart. Nick Redfern is an author, have written a lot of books on the paranormal, including all the UFO books. And he says of the UFO issue, he says, it's not that the UFO accounts are weird, it's that they're too weird. I would say that oftentimes these contact stories or UFO stories seem purposely absurd, like they are meant to baffle us. It's embedded into the mystery. There is something weirder going on than metal spaceships filled with little scientists from another planet. Something more complex, something more elusive is going on. It says I have 38 minutes left. How you doing? How am I doing? Good. A friend contacted me. This guy I respect. I'm going to do this one more time. It's a guy I respect. And he called me up and said, Mike, I am so annoyed. I am so annoyed at your research. You're driving me crazy, all this stuff. Like, you are not being scientific. I said, what do I care? I'm not a scientist. Like, I'm not beholden to the scientific method. And it's true, I'm not a scientist, and I am not an academic. I came into this research as an artist, and I've spent my whole life doing creative work, and I now see my research as a creative act. And I have been researching myself. I am not objective. I am totally subjective. I am not looking at the big picture. I am only looking at the owl stories, and this has been a bottomless pit. The owl is the tiniest facet. Oh, this is tough with a microphone. The tiniest facet in a huge mystery. So, and the owl subject is so enormous, but I'm not looking at the total collective UFO issue. I'm only pulling on the thinnest little thread, the owls, and what I am finding is so rich and so rewarding. That story of the guy like asking about God and seeing the owl, these are the stories that it's what I yearn for, these kinds of stories, and they are arriving in my email inbox. And these stories for me are so reassuring, and the owl is symbolic of the hidden realms. And I have come to see the owl as symbolic of the ultimate mystery. Who are we? Why are we here? What does it all mean? These are the questions that beg to be answered within this narrow sliver of reports, this owl stories. And I have been collecting stories, and I argue my case using stories. And a lot of these are my own stories. And I feel there is a value to these stories, and it feels important to share them. I take this research seriously, and I am trying to find any deeper meaning or symbolic meaning or some lesson for myself or for the people who reach out and contact me, some mythic meaning for right now. And all the stories I've collected, all my writings, all my synchronicities, this is my journey. I am not trying to prove anything. I have already had my proof. And there is a lot of talk right now about disclosure, but I've already had my own disclosure, and I don't need anyone else to confirm what I already know and what I have already seen. I am an experiencer. I have had direct UFO contact, call it abduction or the anomalous. I don't know what any of that means, because these experiences, what it feels like, doesn't match our pop culture idea of what alien contact is being portrayed as. The mainstream narrative doesn't capture it. It is so much stranger. And this has not been easy. This has been hard. This has been terribly difficult to process, and I have spent years doubting my sanity. I am tied into something, and it feels impossible to untangle myself from this. And it's not just me. There are people here, and I know there are people throughout this talk here. There's people that understand what I'm trying to say here, that's very much what Sev was talking about earlier, the difficulty of coming to terms with that may have happened to me. There have been times in my life where I endured such a torrent of experiences, UFOs, so many owls, and absurdly powerful synchronicities. My life flipped upside down on that night in 2006 when I saw those owls in the mountains with Kristen. Between 2006 and 2013, I spent about 95% of my waking hours wondering if I had gone insane. So much was happening. And I felt like I was on the edge of some oblivion, and I'm not exaggerating. Our society, our mother culture says this cannot happen. But from my direct experience, it happened. And there is an awful anguish in trying to live with something that we are told is impossible. This creates such a tension. And within this crisis, some part of me crumbled away, and some newer part of me had to be reborn. And I'm standing here right now talking about this right now, and I am that newer person. I would not have been able to do this before. Thank you. Thank you. I gave that in April early. I was in Texas and I gave that talk, and I just redid it again. And I went a little bit like Baptist faith healer on the stage when I did all that stuff there. So, okay. When people reach out to me with their owl and UFO stories, they ask questions. I ask them questions. I used to have a whole long list of questions. I'm down to only 4. And these 4 questions, I can walk around here. So the first question was what was happening leading up to the event. And by event, I mean either a UFO experience or an owl experience, or most often a combination of both. And the second question I would ask is what changed after the event? And then after that would be, how would you rate your psychic skills? And finally, do you have any healing abilities? Now, given these questions, you should have a pretty good idea what I'm finding in my research. These are transformative events. And in the aftermath of these experiences, people change. They are transformed. They become psychics and healers, and most often energy healers, doing work like Reiki. Now, this Reiki thing, this is so consistent, where people will say, yeah, I had this thing with a UFO and an owl, and then I became a Reiki healer. That guy Jack is a truck driver. He's a Teamster. He, as 50-year-old guy with tattoos and smoking cigarettes, is now a Reiki master. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the Reiki thing is remarkably consistent. I would love to crunch the numbers and get some data on this. I would argue that it's 50% of the people who have a UFO and owl experience are now doing, if they're not doing Reiki work, they're doing something very similar to Reiki. And I could have done the whole presentation just on these healing stories. Okay, a man contacts me with a story. He's from Michigan. He reaches out to me, and he was, as a 12-year-old boy, he was living in an Indian reservation in Michigan. It was a Huron reservation. I was going to say, I had to remember. So that's about right here. If anyone's from Michigan, it's right about there. And it doesn't look like much on the map. It just looks like a little neighborhood. But he was flying his kite as a 12-year-old boy, and a big gust of wind came, and it took the kite and it flew it off into the forest. From the meadow where he was flying the kite, like he watched it go into the forest. So he got his friend, and he said, let's go find my kite. I love that kite. And so he ran into the forest, and they walked around, and they finally saw the kite way high up in the tree. So they walked to the base of the tree, and they looked down below him, and there's an owl all tangled up in the string. And so they're little kids, they get an adult, the adult comes back with some scissors, they cut it free, the owl's been injured, they nurse the owl back to health, and they have released it. He told me the story, and I said, are you a shaman? And he said, oh man, in a word, yes. I can't say too much, but he shared some stories about what was involved in becoming a shaman. It sounded rough. The reason I asked that question, are you a shaman, after he told me that story, is because I've heard so many stories with that flavor and mood coming from people who are now shamans or are following a shamanic path. Synchronicities show up in this research a lot. So when things get weird, this is a sign to pay extra close attention. And the more intertwined and confusing it gets, the more I trust it. The stranger the story, the more it gets tangled up with synchronicity. Hey, you've taken UFO reports, and it's like there's no beginning, middle, and end. There's like, well, this connects to here, and then this thing happened 5 years ago, and this thing happened last night, and then I had this weird experience, and you're like waiting for like we're used to stories that have a beginning, middle, and end, and that's not what you get in a UFO report. It's like some other kind of logic is presenting itself. So in my research, I am treating the owls, UFOs, and synchronicity, and I'm doing my very best to treat these equally. They're obviously not the same thing, but I'm doing my best. If someone has a powerful synchronicity, I try to treat it with the same reverence and the same importance as if they have a close-up UFO sighting. There's a documentary, this woman, Katie Walker. I think this is online. This is quite a good documentary. It's really artfully made. It came out probably around 2013 or so, 2012. And she was shooting this documentary. It's about synchronicity. The title of the documentary is Time is Art. It's totally about the mystery of synchronicity. And the film crew was in the Mission District of San Francisco. And so they were shooting these big, beautiful murals. And so then this one has a UFO. There's a gray alien there, and somewhere in there's an owl in here too, I think. So let me just go one. I can advance this. I got a close up of the owl. There's a little close-up of an owl. That was in that same mural. So they're shooting a documentary on synchronicity, and they're getting video footage of the owls, and they set their camera down. Oh, here's some more owls. This is from the same documentary and the same shoot. So these are stills taken from the video footage, and they set the camera down, and then this happens. They left the camera on, didn't know it, and the camera captures this. Maybe that's something anomalous. I mean, maybe something normal that we could. I've watched that. I don't think they faked it. I've talked with her at length. I've talked to her husband. They were baffled. This guy, John Martin, reaches out to me. John Martin is he is a classical guitar player, lives in Georgia. When Jimmy Carter was in hospice care, he would go and play classical music on his guitar for Jimmy Carter. And he also shoots a lot of video footage of UFOs. I'm going to show a piece of video footage here. Here we go. This is from June 12th, 2021. And this little dot here doesn't look like much. The video is 40 minutes long, and he follows this dot. It's making some unusual things in the sky, but this is like one little clip I'm showing you, and this happens. This owl flies through and comes back again. It's not so much that the owl flew in the same frame as here's slowed it down a little bit. So, but again, if you watch the whole 40 minutes, the dot makes some very unusual things. What you're seeing there is just the shakiness of the camera. That's not the motion that the little dot in the sky was making. Well, you have no idea how happy I was to get an owl. So if you look at this, if you look at the frames, the owl actually touches the little dot in the sky. I've been waiting for forever for that kind of thing. So these Gucci shoes came out shortly after my book was published, as the embroidered flying saucer, or embroidered Adamski-looking flying saucer, and an embroidered owl. These are $830. Not sure what to say about that. So, okay, here's something I like to make this. I work really hard to make a point of this. Oh, do you want to introduce me? I knew. When you were going out to lunch, I knew what was going to happen. Okay, here, let me. Don't worry. We did great. We're doing great. Oh, don't you dare. Okay. So in my research, I make the strong case. I feel like I can make a pretty effective case that owls are connected to UFO contact. But I'm getting all these letters. It's not just UFOs. There's these other things. I'm going to have to use my hand here. So there's other things that show up in the research. Meditation shows up. Owls are connected to meditation. I've got so many stories of owls and meditation. And so what happens is someone is meditating, usually with an intention. I'll tell you what their intention is usually, like, how can I be a better person? How can I be more of service to the world? And they're meditating, they're kneeling in their home, and their eyes are closed. And when they open their eyes, there's an owl in the window looking in at them. This is pretty common. Or they'll meditate outside and there's an owl landed in front of them. And it's often, if it's a window, it's not just that window. Like if they had been right here, they wouldn't be able to see the window. Or if they'd been right here, they wouldn't have been able to see the window. So, very common. Owls and psychedelics, most particularly mushrooms. I got other stories with other drugs, but it's most particularly mushrooms. And visionary owl experiences. Someone takes a massive amount of a heroic dose of mushrooms and then sees a 15-foot tall owl emerge into their bedroom and then speak to them in poetic terms about their mission in life. Like, that counts, right? There's no real owl in the bedroom, but a visionary owl counts just as well. And then I have people taking mushrooms and actually have owls knock their hat off. That's not uncommon. So shamanic initiation. This is well understood in the community of shamans. And I have 4 stories of people that said, I came home and there was an owl in my house. And they tell the story. Here's one story. One woman says, I came home and there was an owl. There was something in the bedroom. She didn't know what it was at the time. There was something in the bedroom. And she was like, there's like something in there. And so she calls the police, like, holy, there's something is in my bedroom. And so the police come and they pull the guns out and they like open the door and there's a little owl in her bedroom. And they're just like, lady, we can't let you do anything. It's like, well, like, we have to call services, the raptor service that we have in the county. And she says, I'm the raptor service in the county. If you made that phone call, that phone would ring. She's a shaman. I have 4 stories where people come home and they're all shamans. Death. This is the deepest vein, maybe more than UFOs, owls and death. All of these I would call highly charged human experiences. So there's 5 of them. It's not that the owl is connected to the UFO. It is the owl is connected to this cluster of highly charged human experiences. So it's not, the owl doesn't represent the UFO. The owl represents these highly charged human experiences, of which a UFO contact is certainly a highly charged UFO experience, as is all the others on the list. I've actually, these modalities have been remarkably consistent in my files. So the near-death experience, nobody's got any owl stories. I'm like waiting. I'm waiting for people. Nobody, I want that on the list. It doesn't seem to show up. What does show up is people who have had a UFO and owl experience and then have a near-death experience. So they have both. Those people, I got enough data to say it is 100% consistent in my data pool, which is not it's big, but it's not that big. So within my data pool, if you've had a near-death experience and an owl and UFO experience, you are a off-the-charts powerful psychic. So the owl and death thing, it's not the lore, the folklore is, the old Irish grandmother will tell a story like, oh, you hear the owl hooting at night. That means someone is going to die. I talked to John and Stan, and they were like, oh, that was like very dark lore in the native population here, owls and death. They're associated with death. You don't mess with the owls. But that's not what I'm finding in my research. What I'm finding is that owls show up after someone has died, most often a parent. So the child, often an adult child, their parent will die and they'll have an owl experience, and they will talk to that owl as if it is their father or their mother. And if I was to ever write another book on owls, the owl and death thing I could write I've got so much rich stuff. So this guy, his dad dies of a massive heart attack. He's there. He just falls out of his chair at the dinner table. And the ambulance come. They take him to the hospital. He was dead on arrival, and all the issues at the hospital, all the emotions at the hospital, and it's late in the night when he finally leaves. And he walks out the doors, and the automatic doors open, and he steps out onto the sidewalk, and there's a little owl on the grass next to the sidewalk. And he goes, "Dad, I love you. You've been a great father. I'm honored to have been your son." I have stories of that magnitude filling my files. This is my iPad, and this is a great tool for research, because if I want a book, I can just click on it, and in about 2 minutes, I can have that book. And when I get it, what I want to do is I want to search that book for a word. And the word I want to search is owl. So there's a simple word search thing in the thing, and it gives you all the points where owl shows up in the book. This is actually from John Mack's Abduction. I did not know that it showed up at 1111 is when I clicked that thing. That was a surprise to me. So I'm looking for the word owl, but in the kind of books that I'm researching and the kind of books that I want to use for my research and the kind of books I'm digging through, the word knowledge shows up, and the word knowledge has owl embedded right in the book, right in the word. So I'm looking for owl, but it's giving me knowledge instead. I'm like, I don't need knowledge. I'm like, let me move past knowledge. So what I need to do is find owl. And to do that, I have to swipe past knowledge. I have to get past knowledge. And the very first time I did this, I saw it right away. I was like, this is a metaphor for me and my work. This told me to turn away from knowledge. This told me to turn away from logic. This told me to follow my heart. Because knowledge tells me, don't do this. Don't do this research. Knowledge tells me this is impossible. Knowledge tells me owls and UFOs cannot be connected. And knowledge most certainly tells me this cannot involve me. But I did follow my heart. This is, it's going to take me about 13 minutes, 15 minutes. How am I doing for time? Great. Perfect. Okay, good. So this is my last story. It's complicated. There's a lot of things going on in the story. To tell this story correctly takes about 40 minutes. I'm going to give you an abbreviated version here, but I'm going to focus on a few key events. I was at my little cabin in Idaho. This would have been March 12th, 2013. It was the afternoon, and I was walking past my desk, and I saw this. It just went click, click. It just showed up in my mind. I had a singular vision of a map of southern Utah and a map of Colorado. We're about here, actually. Holy crap. Wow, would I love to take that out to here. So, okay, so I was a bright yellow line on a map and these 3 push pins. And I knew exactly what these 3 push pins were. Like for 1 second, boom, boom, I'm standing next to my desk. So I sat down and made a map. I made this map. Now, 2 nights before, I had what was the beginning of the most powerful set of experiences I've ever had. And this, seeing this map and analyzing this map changed my life. Up until this point, I had never been able to say I am a UFO abductee, but I had a lot of stories that they sure pointed to it. And I sounded like a fool saying that I wasn't having these experiences. But after this event, all that changed. 48 hours earlier, I was driving home from a UFO conference. It was the IUFOC in Arizona, the International UFO Congress, which they run every year in February. And I had visited some friends, and I hung out down in Flagstaff for a while. So I was driving home, and on the night of March 10th, 2013, I was roughly halfway between Beaver and Cedar City, Utah, on Utah Highway 20. And it was nighttime. Now, I've done a lot of outdoor work. I don't have any problem like sleeping out under the stars. I pull off on this turnoff. It was this great little turnoff, and I'm like, it's going to work out great. And so I pull off on this turnout, and my plan was just to sleep out under the stars. And I love sleeping out under the stars. So there was a little turnoff, and I found a nice spot, and I found a nice flat spot, and I just right next to my car, I just laid out a big thick pad. And this is winter, technically, so it was cold out. And I have a big winter sleeping bag and a pillow and a worn down coat and a big thick pad. And I laid out under the stars, and I was just like, I love this. I love sleeping under the stars. I cannot separate this emotional. I love this. And at some point in the night, I roll over and I look up and see this big thing on a hilltop nearby. And I look up at that thing and I say, this looks just like a landed flying saucer. Now, I already had my blog, and I had already been on podcasts, and I had already like funny little psychic-y things and lots of synchronicities. And I thought I was like hot shit. And I was like, if that was a UFO, I would know it. So I laid there on my pillow and I looked up at this thing, and I was like, okay, I would feel it, right? I'd feel some sort of UFO vibration. And I waited, and I felt nothing. I was like, somebody's got a big house up on that hill. So I rolled over and went to sleep. And later, I woke up, and there's a coyote howling near my head. I sat up, and now like I have slept out thousands of nights. I'm not exaggerating. Thousands of nights. I am completely comfortable in this environment. Like coyotes in the Southwest, they're tiny. I wasn't worried in the slightest. I could not figure out why I couldn't see this thing. It felt like if I had a little dog biscuit, I could just kind of like done that, and it would have landed in the coyote's mouth. There was nothing to see. And I looked up, and the big thing was on the hill. Here's something so this little dot here, the first time I saw it, that little dot off on the side wasn't lit. That little dot was lit the second time I saw it. And the house I grew up in Southfield, Michigan, we had a little porch light. A lawn light. There was a little post in the lawn. It had a light on it, and, clicked the porch or the lawn light on. So I was like, they turned the lawn light on. So I woke up later, and there was a bright light behind a bush. And I sat up, and I tried to figure out, like, what is, like, I was where I was seated. There was like a bush right at my feet, and I was like, what is behind that bush? And it didn't feel like car headlights. It didn't feel like anyone with a flashlight. There's this weird bright light. I rolled over and went to sleep. That bright light is going to come up later in the story. So I got up early, drove home. It's interesting. I got up early, and I packed the car and started driving. It's about an 11-hour drive from that spot to my cabin in Idaho. And I don't remember if I looked up and saw that thing on the hill when I drove away. I certainly could have. I simply don't remember. So I got home, and the first thing I did is I got into Google Maps, and I looked up, trying to find out what was there. And I'm really good with maps. I undoubtedly slept exactly right there. I've got GPS coordinates of all this stuff on my blog. And this thing here, there's a saddle. It's hard to tell in this map, but there's a saddle that I clearly identified. And that would have been the site of the big round structure on the hill. So I did what I always do. I made a blog post. So that blog post is March 12th. Okay, so that I did this drawing and then put it right up on my blog. Now, this was the next day, the 13th, after spent a whole day. GPS, I went kind of crazy. GPS coordinates. What the hell happened that night? And it was, it's just a big round structure on a hill, but there's nothing there on the map. I've since been back to that place, and there's nothing there. So this is what I saw in my mind's eye. And these other two events, I would love to tell these stories if we had another 40 minutes. They're remarkable stories. Here's one thing I can say about this. I was alone on this event, and I was with my friend Natasha on the other two events. We were driving this, so, okay, here we got it. So this one, I got the GPS coordinates of this. I got the GPS coordinates of that. This was in 2011. This was 2010. I was with my good friend Natasha, and we were camping out at these spots. I was alone at this spot. March 10th is Natasha's birthday. I've gone back and slept at each one of these spots again. If Kristen were here, I'd say, do you remember when I said I went insane? Do you remember that part? This is the site in daylight. I went back in daylight. And I have actually, I have not hiked to the top of that saddle there, that little saddle in the hilltop there. That is 2.5 miles away from where I was sleeping. So whatever was on that thing, it was big. So what happened was, it was the act of seeing those three events lined up with exactitude. I could zoom in on each one of those spots, and I could get that pixel get that yellow line 1 pixel thick, and I could zoom in, and there was no way that this is random. And when I saw that line up with those three events, I just was like, I give up. I had been denying this stuff. It was like I knew it with totality. It was like I saw that map, and when I lined it up and saw all three of those events lined up, I was just like, oh, my old life has ended, and my new life has begun. I'm going to take a drink of water just a second. I had a hypnosis session in 2018. I also had one in 2017, and the same story emerged. And the story, now I'm very skeptical of hypnosis. A second. I'm very skeptical of hypnosis for correct reasons, I think. But I did a hypnosis session with Yvonne Smith. Well, here, let me just say some things. It's not easy living under the weight of this stuff. And I'm going to share a story, and I'm going to be really cautious to give it too much meaning or too much power, because it was retrieved through hypnosis. And I'll say right now, I do not believe that this happened literally, like it appeared under hypnosis. And so I'm not allowing myself to see the story that emerged as literal. I do not trust this story, yet it has an emotional power I cannot deny. So in 2018, I was in LA, and Yvonne Smith lives in LA, and she lives in Pasadena, but she lives in, anyway, so she has an office in LA. And so I met her at an office, but I called her months before, and I said, Yvonne, I'm going to be in town later in the summer, and I would love to do a hypnosis session. I'd met Yvonne several times at conferences. She said, Mike, what a nice surprise. I started reading your book, The Messengers, this morning. So I show up at her office. We sit down. I say, I want to look up the night of March 10th, 2013. I have no fear associated with that site. She's like, great. Well, we'll explore that night. And at this point, I had already published. At this point, my book, The Messengers, had already been out, and also my book, Stories from the Messenger. So I had 2 books on owls and UFOs already out. And I said, hey, when I'm under, like, you ask me what's up with the owls. Okay? Like, I don't know, I'm going to be in that vulnerable subconscious state. You ask me what's up with the owls. She says, of course, no problem. So she takes me to the night of March 10th, 2013. She says, what are you doing? I'm like, laying on this ground. I'm on my pad. The stars are beautiful. It smells nice. It's really pretty. It's cold out. I'm nice and warm in my sleeping bag. And we go, and she, and she leads me along. And then all of a sudden I go, it's them. It's them. I know it's them. And I described the bright light behind the bush. And then I say, I'm above this thing. I'm above this thing. I'm like looking down at this big round thing. It looks like black below me, and it's got a ring of lights around it. I'm floating above it. I'm looking down at it. And I said, I think I'm still in the sleeping bag. And Yvonne says, are you out of body? I was like, I don't know. I'm like floating above. I'm looking down at this thing, but I'm still in the sleeping bag. And the next thing that happens is like, whoosh, I'm like instantly in this hallway. And it's this curved hallway that's curving around. And like it is, if there was a hallway that ran around the interior of a flying saucer, this is what it would feel like. So I'm walking through this hallway and I have this immediate feeling. It's like, I'm not tall. Like, I don't know just what it means to be 6 feet tall. And I am like, I'm not tall. I'm short. Like, what's going on? Like, and I say this to Yvonne, I'm like, I'm short. She goes, look around. And I look to my right and I look to my left, and there's a gray alien walking alongside of me, and there's a gray alien walking beside me, and I'm the same height. And she goes, Mike, look down at your skinny body and this space suit thing on. I got these long, skinny fingers, and I kind of go, I think I'm a gray alien. She doesn't flinch at all. She goes, what happens next? Now here, let me back up a little bit. We talked about this afterwards, and what it felt like there was a rubber suit waiting on the craft. I'm not saying this is true, but I'm saying this is what it felt like. It felt like there was a rubber suit of a gray alien on the craft, and I was floating above, and I whoosh, went right into the suit, and then just started walking down the hall. So she says, what happens next? And I'm in this conference room. And it's tacky and it's ugly, and it's got like ugly beige carpeting and ugly like wallpaper and these fluorescent lights, these garish fluorescent lights. And I'm standing there. In front of me is like a plastic table, exactly like that plastic table in front of me, and chairs just like this. And there are about 8 gray beings sitting at this table. They're a little bit fuzzed out, but man, that sure felt like they were gray aliens. And they're blurred out and they're facing me. I told this story to a shaman once. He's like, whoa, Mike, you lost me with the gray aliens at the thing. Like, oh, I don't buy it. Like, I don't buy it. And it's like, well, what would you buy? He'd go, 8 crows. If he said there were 8 crows sitting there, I'd believe you. Like, okay, like, what would you call those crows? You got a thought for saying, oh, your spirit guides. Like, okay, I can totally follow that. But okay, but I was standing there in front of these 8 beings. They were looking at me, and I felt like I was on trial. And I said, what am I doing here? And they said, you volunteered for this. Like, what does that mean? I volunteered for this. Why am I here? And they went, now is the time. So I'd ask it again. What am I doing here? Like, you volunteered for this. Why am I here? Now is the time. I got stuck in this thing. And then all of a sudden something snapped, and I got so angry. And I was just like, this is emotionally unbearable to listen to. For me to sit down with the recording and transcribe this was like gut wrenching. I was so angry, and I am crying and I'm swearing, and I look at these beings and I say, you never told me it would be this hard being here. You never told me there would be anger. You never told me there would be loneliness. You never told me there would be fear. You never told me there would be shame. You never told me it would be this hard being here. And Yvonne asked, what do you mean? Where is here? And I said, this life on earth, my life on earth. And she says, what's going on? They said I agreed to this, but they don't understand what it means here. They don't understand how hard it is to be here. And you could just hear me like fighting to get these words out. And I was just like, this is so fucked up. I am so fucking angry. Like, they never told me about sadness, about fears. They don't understand. And Yvonne says, Mike, what do they want? And I scream, they want me to play some role. Sorry if that was too loud. So, and then I scream that out, and then the audio is silent for almost a full minute. And I went from like veins popping out of my forehead, just filled with tension, to absolute Zen calm. I laid there. I honestly thought my breathing had stopped. I honestly thought my heart had stopped. I was absolutely still. And when you listen to it, 45 seconds, about 45 seconds go by, and Yvonne says, "What happens next?" And very calmly I say, "I think I'm back in the sleeping bag." And we talked for a while. And we talked about what it might mean. And I said, "You know what it feels like? It feels like this is a spy movie. And they're holding an envelope. And that envelope isn't important, but they're not going to let me open that envelope." And then she says, "And Mike, what is your connection to owls?" And without skipping a beat, as clear as can be, I say, "The owls aren't important." Now, this is at a point in my life when I'd published 2 books on owls and UFOs. I'm getting every email that comes into my email inbox is about owls and UFOs. It's owls, owls, owls all day long. Owls are the single most important focus in my life. And she asked me, "What's up with the owls?" And I go, "The owls aren't important." Now, what I'm about to say next, I got some notes here, but it's pretty much seared into my mind. When you listen to hypnosis trance, like the audio, like someone will ask a question, this is a real quiet answer. And these long pauses, and you talk in this sort of hypnosis voice. And I talked plainly and clearly, and I said, "The owls aren't important. I am an artist, and I understand how people take in a story, and how they need a symbol or a sign on a door. The owl isn't important. The owl is a symbol or a sign on the door. The owl is not important. It is what's behind the door that is important. The owl is the correct symbol for the door, but the owl is meaningless. We are on this side of the door in this tight, claustrophobic hallway. And on the other side of the door is an infinite vastness." And I kind of came out, we talked for a little bit, and she took me out of, and I said, "Was I channeling?" And I liked her answer. Her answer was good. She said, "How would I know?" So again, I started this story saying, I don't trust this story. I don't think it is literally true, but I cannot ignore the power of this story. I mean, like, there is no conference room on a UFO with ugly beige carpeting and fluorescent lights. Like, something else happened. So I'm struggling to hold this in my mind and in my, like I know what I saw and felt under hypnosis, but I simply cannot allow myself to trust that it happened literally like that. The implication is that on the night of March 10th, 2013, that was the night I was exploring. That was the night I saw the big round structure on the hill. 2 days later, I put the line on the map. These 3 things lined up. My life changed. That was on the night of March 12th, 2010. My life changed. I was like, oh, my old life is gone. My new life has begun. The day after, March 13th, I started writing the book, The Messengers, this book that would define my life for the last more than a decade now. Or actually, it'll be a decade this fall. It took me years to make that connection. I came back from that UFO conference. I started writing the book that day. If you take that literally, the aliens, like Yvonne said, what do they want? And I screamed, they want me to play some role. And less than 48 hours later, I started writing that book. Mythologies arose out of the owl's ability to see into the night. These ancient stories were of gods and monsters, each with a lesson for our forefathers. I have come to see the modern UFO account as a newer version of that outdated folklore. I am convinced that the source of our mythologies remain alive, and the owls are still performing their vital role. Owls are messengers, and messages are still being delivered. The challenge is, do I have the bravery not only to hear that message, but to truly live it? Thank you.
You can feel it, my
I'm happy to take any questions today. Please.
Mike, earlier on that session, there was a black symbol in his mouth.
With a pencil, sort of like a coffee can with a pencil sticking out the top.
That was now the Rangers has some of those they didn't want.
Well, they had something that looked like a torpedo.
They just looked, it was like your cheek.
Okay. That's okay. I was watching that. I don't remember seeing that, but I remember the torpedo shaped one.
Okay, water heater setting up.
Okay.
I wonder if that ain't poorly.
I have no idea. Yeah. Yes.
So,
go on.
okay.
We're hitting the phone.
So you were just at my home. I wanted to ask you, is it just owls, or this was the day after my birthday, May 21st, and it's a hawk, and he just flew right into my window where I'm having my coffee and was just looking right at me. But it's not just hawks. It's
hummingbirds.
Many different kinds of birds, right?
Hummingbirds, doves.
But they act in strange ways. They're like looking at you like messengers. Is that common?
Well, certainly bird experiences are common, but so how does it tie into events in your life? When did it show up? Did it show up at a prescient moment? There you go. Yeah.
Kind of took it and let's kind of speak our state.
Great. And hawks, yeah, absolutely.
Mike, in your correlation of all the emails you get, where are the people telling you they're seeing owls, and is there a preponderance of sightings in places owls shouldn't be?
No, owls are everywhere. Except Antarctica. So, you know what? I get funny stories of like people from the Navy contact me and say like, there was an owl, or like the Merchant Marines or something. And they'll say there was an owl on our boat, and we were, far enough out from land that it was unusual. So
I figured you guys.
Yeah. Well, so more like in your house is a place they shouldn't be. So that certainly qualifies. But there's owls all over the place, and they're around all the time. We simply don't see them very often because they come out at night. Oh.
Hi. Do you think the owl is being guided to the person, or by some being, some ET, something, or do you think the owl is responding to that person's frequency?
Okay, I cover that in depth in my book, exactly that question. And so what I can do, I could speculate either way and make a really good case. Like, I feel like I've heard so many stories, I could make a good argument for someone was emanating like a vibration and the owl came to that vibration. Owls have the amazing eyesight. Can they see like an aura around someone, right? Bees can see into ultraviolet, and passenger pigeon or homing pigeons can see the magnetic waves of the North Pole in the sky and use them to travel. So animals can see remarkable things. Can the owl see our aura? Like, I can't answer that, but I speculate and wonder, what is the owl seeing? Why is the owl showing? Jacques Vallée, I contacted him and he told me an owl story. He said, so these this happened in France, and this guy was driving down the road, and this owl plop falls out of the sky and lands in the road in front of him. And he stops the car and he gets out, and actually it was two police officers, it was two gendarmes so it was actually two police officers. So they get out of their car and they look at this owl, and the owl's flopping around on the ground, and they look up and there's a flying saucer above them. So I'm like, this is run of the mill stuff in my email inbox. This is like I get this kind of stuff all the time. But so Dr. Vallée said, he postulated that there could have been something that the UFO itself was emanating that disrupted the owl's ability to fly, and it just dropped out of the sky and was flopping around confused on the road. I can follow that logic completely, but what about the owl that shows up and staring in the lady's window when she's meditating? What about the baby owl that shows up when the father has died? Okay, we're dealing with a genuine mystery. And oftentimes, I'm content to just say something magical is going on. And that's not a scientific word, but I could spin my wheels and get stuck deeper in the mud, trying to force an answer around these questions, and I would have no idea whether I was even getting close to the mark. So I'm totally content saying, like, we are confronted with magical events in this, so you like something powerful is happening. Like, how did these events line up? Yeah. So,
Hello.
Hi.
Here's something that's very pragmatic. All right. So you're sleeping in your sleeping bag and you wake up, and on the horizon, only 2.5 miles away, you see what you think is a UFO.
It's not flying, so it's not a UFO. So it's
Well, you saw this.
It looks like a landed flying saucer. Yeah.
Yeah. And you thought it was a landed flying saucer.
Yeah.
How, given your interest, could you possibly roll over and fall asleep?
Because I didn't. I just dismissed it as a house.
Oh.
As a round house. I just dismissed it. Somebody built a big round house up on that hill, or there's like a water tank up there that the cattle ranchers use at the top of a hill, which doesn't make any sense. And it's just a tank and then there's lights around the edge of it. It didn't. I just rolled over and went to sleep. You're asking a great question.
You missed your big chance, dude.
Well, if you follow the story correctly, I was walking around the hallways of that thing with like 1 minute later. So.
Plus, stuff on the map.
This is what you said about how could you just turn around and go to sleep. Well, it's not abnormal for people who come in contact with UFOs or ETs to do things that are illogical. Like, why didn't you take a picture? I don't know. I didn't even think of taking a picture. That's not abnormal. And we can't explain why that happens. Something just takes over and we think we would take a picture. It happens and we don't even think of taking a picture. So for him to just roll over, to me, makes sense.
Yeah.
The whole phenomena is filled with absurdities and irrational things. It's dream logic. The weirdness of these stories is embedded into these stories. Yeah. So that these stories are like, if someone had actually it's more consistent that someone would just roll over and go back to sleep than it would be for them to freak out and run away. Am I right? Or, it's roughly the same, yeah.
It's like an assistant pattern that document the dudes to ignore the light in the room and they can't explain what she is.
Yeah, you could roll over and go to sleep.
Somebody's told me that they probably never.
Yeah. I did it myself in the initial story in 1993 in Maine. I heard a voice in my head that said, now is the time to shut your eyes or roll over and shut your eyes and go to sleep. Great. Oh,
Not really a question, but just I was talking about the Biswenzo event that contacted the desert. And it was definitely tons of screaming, just kind of hectic. And everybody that I don't know is that on. And then when the event was over, a couple minutes later, I think you'd heard about it because I think you made posted something about it. But this huge owl flew right over the event, like right there. And it was like, of the whole thing, that was the most emotionally charged moment of the whole thing, I think, for everybody to see.
This is like the owl seems to represent, like, all that stuff about, like, I'm going to, like, ignore logic and I'm going to ignore knowledge and I'm going to, like, just focus on this owl stuff and just, so I would say the owl represents something emotional in a way that doesn't surprise me that there was, and some of you see an owl on a fence post. It's totally a normal owl. Here, it's like it's a powerful thing. Here, like, are we still recording? Should we leave this for?
Well, we have.
Okay. I'll just talk into the microphone then. I'm like, I almost just want to sit down with folks now. So, anything else?
Like you.